morning, good afternoon, good day, and good evening. I don't know what time of day it is for you, but for me, it's the good time of day. We're back at it again. It is another lovely day. It is wonderful. And as we mentioned yesterday, we are back. So what is it that we're going to talk about today? Well, you see the thumbnail, you clicked on it, you know what it is we're talking about this morning. I told you I want to talk about history, and especially in the morning times. I want to take this time and I want to dedicate it to just talking about history of that deals with black people. And I thought about something after we talked yesterday. One of the things I talked about with it yesterday is dealing with history, and I want to deal with a lot of the upbeat parts of it. But sometimes it's not. And what I mean by that is history is the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I know that this whole CRT thing that's raging, whereas we can't talk about the bad and the ugly because it might make somebody feel bad. Well, today, you know what? We're going to talk about the bad and the ugly because on today in history, what happened today, there are two key issues that happen, and you can kind of see it within the thumbnail and what I talked about. I talked about the fact that you have an ordinance for slavery, which is not the full story. That was kind of a little troll there. And then in addition to that, we have white riots. Again, little troll. It was just, well, nah, it was. It's not even a troll. That was actually white riots. So what is it that we're going to be talking about today? Well, today, and again, I want you guys to look over here on this side here, because one of the things I want us to make sure that we're constantly doing, that we are supporting black business. Attorney Amos over here, phenomenal attorney. If you have any kind of issue that she says there that she deals with, I've worked with her in the past, and she is a phenomenal attorney. And her whole firm, both her and Ms. Farms that work, and Attorney Farms that work with her over at her firm, are two outstanding attorneys. They are the creme de la creme, so to speak. So, okay, and we also have attorney Sean McLaughlin as well. So there we have a lot of good, just high energy black attorneys in this space, and I want to make sure that if you have a black business, again, by all means, send that out for me. Let's get after it. Let's do it. So what is it that we're talking about today? Let me just hop right into it. I don't want to drag it. I don't want to sit there and how somebody said, or one of my mentors in the YouTube space, he talking about long stroking you. So I'm not trying to long stroke you today. So let's get in on this, and let's see, what do we have here? I think that I am, what is going on? There we go. Outstanding. So we do have Mr. Paladin. Hello, how you doing this morning, Lord Sir Paladin? And I want to talk about some things, and let me just get it off my chest, because we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And with you here, let's transition this over to that good, the bad, and the ugly. We're talking about actual history, not just the stuff that makes us feel good, but actual history and how actual history happened. And I guess we'll start with the earliest first. And the thing I want to start with is that ordinance, that Northwest ordinance that would I alluded to and I pointed out on the thumbnail. And why I really want to get into that, and I want to talk about that extensively. And let me move some things around here as well. Give me 1 minute. Forgive me, we are new to using this platform, and I don't want to. I'm not gonna say I don't want to. I'm not going to screw this up by not having things where they should go, or where they can be seen properly. So let's move some stuff around, and I am going to put that over there right now. So now we have a space here where we can have Mr. Lord Sir Paladin. Your comment will be up there with us as we're going through this process. And by all means, support us. You have the links at the bottom. Give me one of those. Give me that whole YouTube thing. You know, that clicky. You know, where you sit there and we're gonna click and smash and all. I don't need you to just press the like button, press the subscribe button. Give me that follow, and share the content that we're doing. That's all I'm asking for you today. And thank you, sir. I say, if it's fine, if the volume's fine, if the audio's good, thank you. I appreciate it. So what are we talking about today? I want to talk about that ordinance. And I think before we actually get into it, give us a little backstory on what actually happened with the ordinance that we're talking about. Because if it helped and got rid of slavery, so to speak, or made it so that slavery in the territories north of the Ohio River were not slave territories, what led to that? What is it that we're actually talking about? Well, I think it's important to look at the actual founding of the country, right? So we have the Declaration of Independence, and when that was actually done back in 1776. So you has the chart that's there for you right there along the side, helps you to see it kind of gives you a time frame, gives you a sense of or an idea of what time we're dealing with here. And so after that, you had essentially what I like to refer to as the first government of the country, and that was the Articles of Confederation. And that ran all the way from that Declaration of Independence time, or actually shortly thereafter, 1777, all the way to 1789. 1789 was the ratification of the U.S. Constitution, and then from that point on, we had the constitutional government. However, and one of the things that's important is during that time frame, this is when that ordinance was passed, right, in 1787. Right, so this was during that first government period when that ordinance was passed, and it said about a lot of different things, specifically for how a state could come into existence and be a part and equal to the original 13 colonies. So that was a process that they had set up, and that was what that ordinance was. Because a lot of people want to start moving out west. Everybody was like lined up there on that side of the country, and many people wanted to begin moving out west. And so with that so they had to set up a framework, so to speak, on how it is that how states could be formed. Other territories, once they were territories, could become states, as it were, once people started settling out west, taking the land from the natives that were there, having that colonial settler mindset. People already there, we're going to come in, we're going to take your land, and then we're going to say it's ours, and how can we become a part of this nation as a part of the people that were already there initially? So that racist white supremacist, we're going to stick together ideology, taking the land from the people that was already there, and we're going to sit there, and we need a way in which we can become part of that white family at the time, or the United States at the time. And they gave 3 primary things on how it is that you can do that. The first was that they wanted to appoint a governor or a secretary and 3 judges to administer the territory. The second was that once they had reached a population of 5,000 free white adult males. Right. So again, we're looking at how it is they're structuring and they're limiting the government. We always think about voter suppression being something that is new. It's been around since the founding of the country. And as who could elect those legislatures. And the third step was that when the territory reached a population of 60,000 free white residents, it could write a state constitution, and with the approval of the Congress at the time, then they could be admitted into the United States. So that's where we're at right now. That's when you're looking at it, when you as a what that ordinance actually did for that time frame. That was what it did then. That was what that ordinance did for that time frame. But one of the other important things that it did as well during that same time frame, and but wait, there's more. That I didn't want to do this whole Steve Jobs, but one more thing, and you'll forgive me. I'm kind of preoccupied. I got my family in town as well right now, but here's a really interesting part about it. So I alluded to the fact that it made it so that slavery wasn't allowed, but there were conditions. And many of the same, and I'm not saying many, but some of the same conditions from that time till now still exist. One of which is that indentured servitude or slavery couldn't exist except, similar to the 13th Amendment, for people who were convicted criminals. So if you were a convicted criminal up under that Article 6 up under that ordinance, then hey, same as today, free for the slavery at that time. The other thing that, actually 2 other points, but one of the other points was that if a slave had escaped and got there to one of these free new states or free territories, then there was extradition back to where they came from. So while we might say, oh, slavery was free there, that has a you could still send someone who was in a condition of bondage, so they couldn't just escape to one of these new Northwest territories, as it were. And the last thing, and it's I don't want to say troubling, it's kind of par for the course at this point when looking at it. But once they became a state, once they were no longer a territory and they got the official title that they were a state, they didn't have to stick to being slave free. They could elect or they could opt in to slavery at that point. And that was up under that ordinance. So when I said it was trolling a little bit, it is trolling a little bit because while they could, and that was the general rule that they would start off that way, there was nothing that said that once they became a state that they had to stay that way, right? So that is a very interesting component of that ordinance, and it's something that when you're looking at it, it has some implications, and we talked about some of them. And when you look at the 13th Amendment, whether or not a state had to remain a free state or if it could become a slave state. And there was one additional thing that this thing did, and we're still feeling it to today, because as I mentioned initially, and some people might say, well, it's no longer good law because once the Articles of Confederation were done and you came into the Constitution, then at that point, it was no longer good law. But one of the things they did when they ratified the Constitution, they took this ordinance and they made it law. That was one of the first things they did. And once they did that, it set a precedent. And that was something that Abraham Lincoln, as a president here, that he leaned on when he was trying to abolish slavery, talking about that this was something that was contemplated by the original founders. It was something that they allowed was for the federal government to have a say over how states govern themselves. And it has he used some pretty fancy things, but in that colonial settler mindset, in that white supremacist mindset, you can see that they were still able to get rid of the parts that they didn't want, and they still do that today. So what's the second thing? And I guess that I want to get into the second thing and give you a little backstory on it as well, but I want to get into the other part of it. And this was something that happened in 1863. And there's a divide that's felt in New York today behind this riot that happened in 1863. And this riot was all behind, or stemmed behind, people not wanting to be drafted into the Civil War. That was what was going on at the time. They had one of the worst riots or uprisings of the citizenry ever in the history of this country. Right, so we're looking at a time frame that there was just this general upheaval behind going to war with the South, and specifically in New York, because everybody likes to talk about, oh, well, the North was about freedom and not slavery, but the South was. New York at this time was a state, and specifically New York City was a place there in that district in Manhattan that was actually pro-slavery. A lot of their businesses, a lot of their business models really got down into supporting slavery because they depended on the cotton and things coming out of the South to help them in their economy in the North, in New York specifically. Excuse me here. So here you have a situation at that time. A lot of people, they didn't want to be competing with black people who were now free there in that territory or in that state. They didn't want to have to worry about blacks who weren't considered a full person still getting rights like a full person. There was just this whole angst and anger that they had towards black people at that time. And it should have been geared towards the government, and they should have put it towards the government, but they put it towards blacks as well. And so they were mad at the government for initiating the draft or bringing the draft into fruition. And because of that, not one, not two, but 3 days, they went and they rioted in New York. 3 whole days they went and they rioted, which means that they had enough time to think about it and say, hey, maybe what we did was wrong. No, they hesitated. It was like, nah, not only what we did was right, we're going to go in there, we're going to do it again. So over the course of 3 days, and let's look at some of the highlights for it, because one of the things I when looking at this that was interesting to me, in considering what it is that can make these white folks get so mad at black people, because when you're dealing with that ideology in this racist white supremacist, initially everybody was nationalistic. They're coming together. It's no longer about just what nation they're from, whether they're Irish or whether or not their religion is Catholic or Protestant. Now they're all considered white, and here they are having to deal with the blacks, having to deal with this country, and them feeling like now they got it. Now not only have to compete with each other, but they now have to compete with the blacks, who they felt that they were far superior above, right? And when you look at the number of deaths that happened, there's a conservative estimate of what was provided at that time, but then even more so, there was this huge uprising that happened where a lot of people who looked at it, the researchers looking at it, figured that it wasn't 115 deaths and 2,000 injured. It looked like it was more than 2,000 deaths and 8,000 injured or wounded. And that's a lot of individuals, or a lot of people hurt during that time frame, and the majority of them were black. Out of the reported 115 deaths that were reported at the time, 106 of those were black people. So officially, that's what they had. So 106 black out of 115 total deaths is what they had during that time frame, and that was what they were able to glean and pull out from the records they had. And they estimate that it was a lot more than what the record showed as well. And they had a lot of violence, a lot of issues with blacks being exempted from the draft. And so they were exempted for the draft, and now they're competing with them. So the Irish particularly were the ones who, out of all the white folks, who really got in there ready to riot, and were the ones who were primarily involved in the riots. And even on that first day, one of the things that happened was that there was the Colored Orphans Asylum, and they went in there, they looted it, and they burned it down. Very first day, very first thing they did. So when you're looking at some of those highlights that happened during that time frame, they were I don't want to say, they were just horrible. There's no other way to put that besides it was just a really horrible thing. And the only way to quell and squash it was that they had to send the military in. So you had the military fighting. They were over in Gettysburg, and they had to actually take troops away from the war they were fighting with the South in the Civil War to come down there to the people that they're drafting into their military, into their army. Think about the irony in that. And they had to go after they got these individuals, and they had to put them down as well in order to bring them and conscript them into the army or into the military at the time. Really interesting turn of events at that time. So that was what you were looking at as far as the outcome during that time frame. And when I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, one of the things I like looking at as well are some of the highlights. And one of the things that stands out or jumps out at me is a lot of times we hear about interracial marriage, and we for me, being in the legal sphere, thinking about the Loving case, that was one of the first times when you were allowed to have interracial marriage in the United States. But even as far back as 1863, there was interracial marriage that was going on. As a matter of fact, over the course of these 3 days, on the second day, after they had went through and they took their initial ire out on black people in general, they came back, and now they're looking at a couple interracial. They killed them and they white wives. So the black guy and their white wives, they killed both of them. And it was interesting in looking at a lot of the stuff that was going on during this time frame, because again, when looking at it and considering it, there's a lot that's there that you really have to think about as far as what went into the anger, the angst that these individuals had during that time frame towards black people. And I guess the real interesting part about it is, I mentioned the orphanage at the beginning. right? The colored orphanage or asylum that they had. When they tried to rebuild it, one of the things that was going on during that time frame was when the blacks were trying to be in their areas or in the neighborhoods where they were living, the whites were coming through and burning everybody out, and the whites who were renting or had these black people living there decided that they were going to evict them and put them out in the street because they didn't want their places burned down. So when they went to go rebuild this orphanage, they didn't want to worry about, oh, this could happen again. They really protested that orphanage being built back there, and instead it had to go to a place that was sparsely settled at that time in the area, which eventually came to be known as Harlem. So the orphanage for blacks started off in Harlem, and we can see that that's essentially what you have is a sparsely populated area that that later on became known as a hub for black people, which is Harlem. And I'm not even getting to Seneca. Where I'll get into Seneca another day, which is Central Park, but I'll get into that another day because that is another aspect of the history of New York, where you can see the deep racial tensions and divides that are still impacting today. So I didn't lie to you or didn't mislead you too much, I hope, in looking at what the history that I want to look at for the day, and looking at it from that time frame, looking at it from that perspective. We have both an ordinance that was purported to have eliminated slavery in the Northern Territories, but as we just went over, not really the case, right? There was a lot of things that it could have done in order to be stronger with that, but instead, the ordinance didn't completely eliminate slavery. The ordinance instead just made it so that it was permissible to have slavery once they became a state. And if you were a criminal, which today, again, can't treat you like a slave unless you're a criminal. So we can't call you nigger anymore, but we can call you a criminal and treat you the same way. So there was a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of stuff that's there. And I'm really looking for a good, positive takeaway, besides the fact that it's history and it's accurate, for what we can take away. But the actual takeaway is that colonial settler mentality, in taking away the land from the people, reapportioning it the way that they wanted to, and then afterwards deciding whether or not they want to continue with the practice of slavery or not. That would be one of the takeaways. And it's not a nice takeaway, but that's one of them. And two, that racial divide goes all the way back. When the Civil War was going on, even places where you thought that it was, or you're traditionally taught, were bastions or places where you can go and that you can get away from slavery, where you can go to the north. And if you were fortunate enough to be born in the north and you were born free, then you were okay. Or if you were fortunate enough to be born in one of these territories, these territories they had were non-slave territories. But there were a lot of loopholes and a lot of ways in which they can get around that. And there are some stories that are going to come up over the course of, I guess, as we're doing this, that I want to highlight on individuals that were there in these territories and then later pulled down to the South and put into a state of bondage or a state of slavery. So it's a really ugly scar on the country, and it's something that not dealing with it doesn't help anything. And it's something that we definitely should be dealing with, something we should be looking at, and we should be looking at it honestly and with some level of integrity so that we can at least understand where it is that we've been, so that we can try and start healing and try to start making sure that we have a good foundation in which to deal with each other on in honesty, and not with the lies that we constantly tell each other, on the lies that we're constantly taught and we're indoctrinated within schools. So if you don't know the truth, then you begin to think things, and then you become really embittered, especially as you get older, thinking about what the actual truth is. And I'm fortunate because my parents were two individuals that made sure that I had a lot of those books to read growing up. And again, I'm going to encourage you, hop onto the Patreon. We're doing 3 times in a week. We're going to be talking about various books that I like to read or that I've read that have helped to expand my mind and help me to understand various aspects. One of the ones we talked about here recently, and it's on the Patreon right now, and I'll bring it over to YouTube. That'll probably be the only one I'll bring over to YouTube, is dealing with the Dictator's Handbook. Well, I think I'm gonna do another one, bring it over to YouTube. But one of them I'll bring over to YouTube so you guys can get an idea of what it is that we're talking about and what it is that we're dealing with over there on the Patreon. So we're doing some exciting things. And also, if you're on the Patreon, you can help me pick topics. What is it that you want to hear about? What is it we want to discuss? I say I'm gonna be holding lives with those individuals on the Patreon, and it'll be some a place where they can give me some feedback on what type of topics that you guys want to talk about, what it is that you want to hear about, what it is we need to get into, because there's a lot that's out there. And I don't really want to hold you guys up too long. I think I've held you guys a little longer than I anticipated. It's almost half an hour. I try to keep these around 20 minutes or less, or around 15-minute mark, but it's a little longer than I anticipated today. But yeah, I say that's about it for you. And I know I didn't tell you guys before, but I love you. Hope that you guys are having a great day, because I'm going to my family's in town, and I'm getting ready to go enjoy some time with them. And may you always, always, always have peace in your life. And with that, we are out. Oh, I thought we were out. There we go.